Jasmine's entire body froze as Captain Reynolds laughed in her face.
Your mom flies Special Forces missions.
Sure, kid. The other pilots snickered. Then the hangar door swung open. Major Alicia Washington stood there in full flight gear, her medals gleaming under the lights. Everyone fell silent. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing justice served to people who underestimate others. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next as this arrogant pilot realizes the massive mistake he just made. Jasmine Baker had always been exceptional. At 12 years old, the bright-eyed black middle schooler maintained perfect grades, devoured aviation books, and could name every aircraft in the United States military fleet. Her bedroom walls displayed meticulously assembled model planes hanging from the ceiling, technical diagrams, and a framed photo of her mother in full flight gear standing beside an F-15E Strike Eagle. Unlike most of her classmates at Westridge Academy, Jasmine attended the prestigious, predominantly white private school on a merit scholarship. The daughter of a single military parent and raised primarily by her grandfather while her mother served overseas, Jasmine stood out among the wealthy students whose parents were executives, doctors, and politicians. Career Day arrived at Westridge with its typical fanfare. Students eagerly shared their parents' accomplishments, most involving corporate success stories or medical breakthroughs. When Mrs. Patterson, a thin-lipped woman with perpetually pursed lips, called on Jasmine, the girl stood with quiet confidence. "My mother is Major Alicia Washington." Jasmine began, her voice clear and proud. "She flies Special Forces missions with the Air Force's elite tactical aviation unit." A murmur rippled through the classroom. Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows arched skeptically. "That's quite impressive." Jasmine, Mrs. Patterson responded with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps you'd like to tell us something more verifiable about your mother's career." Heat rushed to Jasmine's cheeks. "It's true, Mrs. Patterson. My mom's been flying combat missions for 8 years. She was the first black female pilot in her squadron to—" "Yes, well," Mrs. Patterson interrupted, glancing at her watch. "Let's move on to someone else, shall we? Taylor, I believe your father just made partner at his law firm." As Taylor launched into a detailed account of her father's corporate law achievements, Jasmine slid back into her seat, shoulders hunched. She felt eyes boring into her back. After class, Taylor and Brandon, two of the most popular students, cornered Jasmine by her locker. "Everyone knows there aren't any black female Special Forces pilots," Brandon said, leaning against the adjacent locker. "My dad's brother is a colonel, and he says women can't handle those missions." Taylor twirled her blonde hair around her finger. "You don't have to make stuff up to fit in, you know. It's kind of pathetic." Jasmine clutched her books tighter against her chest. "I'm not making anything up. My mom—" "Sure," Taylor cut in. "And my mom's an astronaut. On Mars." They walked away laughing. That afternoon, Principal Hargrove announced an upcoming field trip to Langley Air Force Base, where students would tour facilities and learn about military aviation careers. Jasmine's heart leapt, finally a chance to validate her mother's career to her doubting classmates. As permission slips were distributed, Mr. Wilson, the trip chaperone and science teacher, paused at Jasmine's desk. "Jasmine," he said quietly, "I understand the desire to embellish certain details to impress your peers, but making up stories about military service is inappropriate. These are real heroes we're talking about." "But Mr. Wilson, I'm not." He raised his hand, stopping her. "Just think about it, okay? There's no shame in admitting your mother has a normal job." That evening, Jasmine called her mother's satellite phone, knowing she might not answer. After 4 rings, the voicemail activated. "Mom, it's me," Jasmine said, her voice cracking slightly. "Everyone at school thinks I'm lying about your job. We're going to Langley next week for a field trip, and I don't know what to do. They're making fun of me, And even the teachers don't believe me. She paused, wiping a tear. I miss you. Please call when you can. At home, Jasmine's grandfather retired. Air Force Master Sergeant William Baker noticed her subdued mood during dinner. Something troubling you, Sunshine, he asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. Jasmine pushed her mashed potatoes around her plate. Grandpa, did Mom ever have trouble getting people to believe she was a pilot? The old man's expression darkened momentarily. Every step of the way, he said after a pause. But your mother never let other people's limitations define her reality. The Baker family stands tall in the face of doubt. But what if the whole school thinks I'm a liar? Even Principal Hargrove called me to his office today. He suggested I might need counseling for my elaborate fantasies about Mom. Her grandfather reached across the table and squeezed her hand. The truth doesn't need anyone's permission to exist, Jasmine. Remember that. Despite her grandfather's encouragement, Jasmine decided to remain silent about her mother until after the field trip. The weight of disbelief had become too heavy to carry publicly. She would wait and let the truth reveal itself in time. The morning of the Langley Air Force Base tour arrived crisp and clear, though Jasmine's stomach churned with dread. She sat alone on the bus, watching suburban landscapes give way to the imposing military installation with its sprawling runways and security checkpoints. The excited chatter of her classmates faded to background noise as anxiety tightened her chest. After passing through security, the class gathered in the visitor center where their tour guide awaited. Captain James Reynolds stood at parade rest, his blue uniform pressed to perfection, decorations displayed prominently on his chest. Tall, with close-cropped brown hair and sharp features, he carried himself with the confident authority that came from years of command. Welcome to Langley Air Force Base, future leaders of America, Reynolds announced, scanning the group with practiced precision, until his gaze landed on Jasmine. Something flickered across his face recognition, perhaps, before he continued. Today you'll get an inside look at the world's premier air combat facility and the extraordinary individuals who serve here. As they moved through the installation, Jasmine deliberately hung back, hoping to avoid attention. Captain Reynolds led them through administrative buildings, past maintenance facilities, and alongside the flight line where F-22 Raptors stood in majestic formation. Under different circumstances, Jasmine would have been ecstatic, but today she absorbed everything in anxious silence. During a pause near a hangar, Taylor sidled up to Captain Reynolds, her perfect smile in place. "Captain, we have someone in our class who claims her mother flies Special Forces missions from this base," Taylor announced loudly, glancing back to ensure Jasmine could hear. "Is that even possible?" Reynolds' eyebrows rose as several students turned to look at Jasmine, who wished she could disappear. Special Forces aviation is among the most elite specialties in our military. Reynolds explained, his voice carrying across the group. The selection process eliminates roughly 97% of qualified applicants. Those who make it are truly exceptional. But are there any female pilots doing that? Brandon chimed in, feigning innocent curiosity. Reynolds cleared his throat. While our military has made great strides in integration, certain combat roles remain predominantly male due to the extreme physical and psychological demands. Only the best of the best qualify, regardless of background. Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly while shooting a pointed glance at Jasmine. "What about Major Washington Taylor?" pressed. "Does she fly secret missions here?" Captain Reynolds' expression remained neutral, though his jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not familiar with any officer by that name in our special operations groups. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." The group continued moving, stopping at a training facility where a flight simulator sat ready for demonstration. Reynolds invited students to experience the cockpit, calling them forward alphabetically. When he deliberately skipped Baker between Adams and Carlson, Jasmine found her voice. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly. I think you missed me." Reynolds turned, regarding her with cool appraisal. "And you are Jasmine Baker, sir." "Ah, yes. The young lady with the imaginative family history." Laughter rippled through the group. "Tell me Miss Baker is your mother, this mysterious Major Washington who supposedly flies classified missions." Heat rose to Jasmine's face. "Yes, sir. Major Alicia Washington Baker. She's deployed right now, but—" Reynolds cut her off with a dismissive wave.
"Young lady, I've served at this base for 7 years. I know every pilot in our special operations groups."
Creating fictional military personnel, especially when claiming they perform classified duties, borders on stolen valor. It's disrespectful to those who actually serve. The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine felt 24 pairs of eyes boring into her as tears threatened. "I'm not lying," she whispered. Next student Reynolds called, turning his back to her. A tall black man in a security forces uniform observed from nearby, his expression unreadable as Jasmine fought back tears. He made brief eye contact with her, but remained at his post without intervening. Unable to bear the humiliation any longer, Jasmine mumbled an excuse to Mrs. Patterson and fled to the nearest restroom. Locking herself in a stall, she finally allowed silent tears to fall. Minutes later, the door opened, and work boots appeared beneath the stall door. "Hey there," a gentle female voice called. "You okay in there, honey?" Jasmine wiped her eyes and emerged to find a woman in a Flightline mechanic's uniform. Her name tape read Foster, and her hand showed the ingrained grease stains of someone who worked with aircraft engines daily. "I'm fine, Jasmine," managed unconvincingly. The woman handed her a clean shop rag. "Sometimes the boys' club around here can be a bit much," she offered with a knowing smile. "Want to talk about it?" "I'm Sergeant Diane Foster," the mechanic said, leaning against the sink while Jasmine composed herself. "Aircraft Maintenance Squadron. And you look like someone who just ran into the Pentagon's worth of military bureaucracy." Despite herself, Jasmine managed a small smile. "I'm Jasmine Baker. My mom is Major Alicia Washington, but no one believes she exists, especially not that Captain Reynolds." Foster's eyes widened fractionally. "Washington. The call sign, midnight." Jasmine's heart leapt. "Yes, that's her. You know my mom." Foster glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "By reputation only. Look, certain units operate under different protocols. Their personnel records aren't accessible through standard channels, and members don't exactly advertise their affiliations. So Captain Reynolds was lying." "Not necessarily lying," Foster corrected carefully, "just not cleared to know. There's a difference." Foster motioned for Jasmine to follow her into a small office adjacent to the women's restroom. After ensuring they were alone, she pulled a maintenance logbook from a locked drawer and flipped to a page signed by A. "Washington Aircraft Commander. I'm not supposed to show you this," Foster whispered, "but I can't stand seeing that smug Reynolds talk down to a kid like that. Your mom's the real deal, Jasmine. One of the best pilots I've ever serviced aircraft for, though we've only crossed paths a few times." Jasmine ran her fingers over her mother's signature relief, washing through her. "Why would he say he doesn't know her?" Foster shrugged. "Could be security compartmentalization. Could be something personal. The aviation community is small, and not everyone gets along." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say I've been one of 7 women in a squadron of 200 men. The path hasn't always been smooth." Foster rolled up her sleeve, revealing a forearm with burn scars. "Engine fire in 2018. 2 male technicians froze. I pulled the pilot out and got this lovely reminder for my troubles. Still had to fight for my promotion, because some thought I was too emotional under pressure." The bathroom door banged open, and Captain Reynolds' voice cut through the room. "Foster, what are you doing with a civilian in a restricted area?" Foster straightened immediately, but didn't flinch. "Just helping a distressed visitor, sir. Standard courtesy. Your courtesy is misplaced, Reynolds snapped, eyeing Jasmine coldly. This young lady is entertaining dangerous fantasies about classified personnel. I won't have you encouraging her. With respect, sir, I was simply—
Return to your duties, Sergeant.
His tone left no room for argument. Foster nodded curtly, but as she passed Jasmine, she gave a reassuring wink. Reynolds waited until Foster departed, then turned his full attention to Jasmine. Miss Baker impersonating military personnel or claiming family connections to special access programs carries serious consequences. I strongly suggest you drop this charade before it affects your future. It's not a charade, Jasmine insisted. My mother is. Your mother, Reynolds interrupted, his voice dangerously soft, is not what you claim. I don't know what game you're playing, but it stops now. Mr. Wilson appeared at the door, expression stern. Jasmine, we've been looking everywhere for you. The class is moving on. As Wilson escorted her out, he spoke in hushed, angry tones. I've never been so embarrassed by a student's behavior. Captain Reynolds is a decorated combat veteran, and you've wasted his valuable time with these stories. I'll be speaking with your grandfather about this disruptive behavior. Jasmine rejoined the class, now painfully aware of the whispering and sideways glances. Even Mrs. Patterson kept a noticeable distance as they continued the tour. When they finally boarded the bus to return to school, Jasmine found a crumpled note in her jacket pocket. In neat handwriting was a phone number and a brief message. Truth outlasts doubt. Call if needed. SGTF. 2 weeks crawled by without a word from Jasmine's mother. Each silent day amplified the isolation Jasmine felt at Westridge Academy. The hallways seemed longer, the stairs colder, the whispers louder. Her usual sanctuary, the school library with its aviation section, now felt unwelcoming as students pointedly relocated whenever she sat nearby. On Wednesday morning, Jasmine found herself summoned to Mrs. Winter's office, the school counselor who specialized in student adjustment issues. Jasmine, I've reviewed the reports from your teachers and the Langley field trip incident. Mrs. Winters began, her voice carrying the practiced, gentle tone of someone delivering difficult news. I'm concerned about the elaborate narrative you've constructed about your mother. It's not a narrative, Jasmine insisted wearily. It's the truth. Mrs. Winters made a note on her pad. Creating fantasy parental figures is actually quite common in children from unstable homes. It provides a sense of security and importance that might be lacking in reality. My home isn't unstable. My grandfather is doing his best, I'm sure, Mrs. Winters interrupted. But a child your age needs maternal guidance, if your mother has abandoned the family. It's understandable. You'd create a heroic alternative to cope with that loss. Jasmine's hands clenched into fists. My mother hasn't abandoned anyone. She serves our country. The counselor sighed. Jasmine, we've checked. There's no record of a Major Washington in the units you've described. Your grandfather confirmed your mother's absence but was remarkably vague about her employment. These are concerning inconsistencies. The bell rang, signaling the end of their session. Mrs. Winters closed her notebook. We'll continue this on Friday. In the meantime, I want you to journal about your feelings regarding your mother's absence. Accepting reality is the first step toward healing. Walking into the hallway, Jasmine immediately spotted the newest addition to her humiliation. Taylor stood with her friends beside a locker where someone had taped a crudely photoshopped image of Jasmine's face on a cartoon superhero body with the caption, "My mom's a super secret agent too." The laughter that erupted when they noticed her presence cut deeper than any previous mockery. Brandon pulled out his phone, apparently filming her reaction. Hey everyone, it's Major Liar's daughter. Tell us about today's secret mission, Jasmine. Jasmine rushed past, eyes fixed on the floor, only to collide with Principal Hargrove. Miss Baker, my office. Now. The principal's office had never seemed so intimidating. Hargrove sat behind his massive desk, glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed a file. Her file, Jasmine realized with a sinking feeling. Miss Baker, I've received multiple reports about your continued disruption of the educational environment with these military fantasies. Captain Reynolds personally contacted me about your behavior at Langley. Sir, I've been patient because of your academic achievements, but this has gone far enough. Your scholarship to Westridge is predicated on exemplary conduct as well as grades. He removed his glasses, fixing her with a stern gaze. Both are now in jeopardy. You're threatening my scholarship because people don't believe me about my mom's job, Jasmine asked incredulously. I'm warning you that persistent dishonesty has consequences. Westridge Academy stands for integrity above all else. That afternoon, Jasmine received her history exam marked with a D-, her first failing grade ever. Mrs. Patterson had deducted points for unsupported assertions in her essay about modern military integration. At home, Jasmine picked at her dinner while her grandfather took a phone call in the other room. His voice grew progressively louder until he finally exclaimed, "That's completely unacceptable," before hanging up forcefully. He entered the dining room, his expression thunderous. That was your principal. Apparently you've been spinning tales about your mother being some kind of secret agent? Grandpa, you know what Mom does. Why didn't you tell them? The old man sighed heavily, sinking into his chair. Alicia made me promise not to discuss her assignments with anyone. Operational security, she called it. He reached for Jasmine's hand. I told them your mother serves honorably, and that should be enough. Well, it's not. They're taking away my scholarship if I don't admit I'm lying. Before her grandfather could respond, the house phone rang. Jasmine answered it, not recognizing the number. Is this Jasmine Baker? A familiar female voice asked. Sergeant Foster. Listen carefully, Jasmine. Your mother's unit is scheduled to return to Langley tomorrow after their deployment. I can't give details, but there's an airshow demonstration Friday that's not exactly public knowledge. Jasmine's heart raced. My mom will be there. I've said all I can, but if I were you, I'd make sure to attend the school's second field trip to the base this Friday. What second trip? As if on cue, her grandfather called from the living room. Jasmine, there's an email from your school about another Langley visit for an airshow demonstration. They need permission forms by tomorrow. After hanging up, Jasmine sat frozen, processing this development. Another chance to prove the truth. But, after everything that had happened, the prospect filled her with dread, rather than hope. I'm not going, she announced when her grandfather entered the kitchen. I can't face them all again. Master Sergeant Baker studied his granddaughter's defeated posture. Jasmine Elise Baker, he said firmly. In our family, we face our battles head on. The truth always comes to light. But what if Mom doesn't show up again? What if Sergeant Foster is wrong? Her grandfather's expression softened. Have faith in your mother. She's never let you down yet. That night, unable to sleep, Jasmine scoured the internet for any mention of female Special Forces pilots. Most information led to dead ends or general articles about military aviation. Just as she was about to give up, she found a recent military press release about tactical aviation training exercises. It mentioned a squadron with her mother's unit number, though no personnel were named due to operational security. It wasn't much, but it was something. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's shoes? Comment number 1 if you think she should stand up to her bullies, or number 2 if you believe she should wait for her mother to return. Have you ever been in a situation where no one believed you when you were telling the truth? Like this video if you've experienced the pain of being doubted unfairly. And subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming adversity. Has anyone ever underestimated you because of your race or gender? We'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. Now, let's see what happens when Jasmine returns to Langley Air Force Base. Friday morning arrived with an atmosphere of electric anticipation. Westridge Academy's second field trip to Langley Air Force Base had been upgraded from a regular tour to access to the semi-annual tactical demonstration, a rare privilege typically reserved for military families and VIPs. Students chatted excitedly about the fighter jets they might see, while Jasmine sat silently, her stomach knotted with equal parts hope and terror. This time, the security protocols were noticeably stricter. Military police checked identification twice, and a bomb-sniffing dog inspected their bus before they were allowed onto the base grounds. The heightened measures only added to the students' excitement and to Jasmine's mounting anxiety. "I hear they're showing off the new F-35 seconds," Brandon told anyone who would listen. "My uncle says they cost like $100 million each." Jasmine knew the actual figure was closer to $80 million per aircraft, but she kept the correction to herself. Drawing attention was the last thing she wanted today. To her dismay, Captain Reynolds awaited their group at the visitor checkpoint, his uniform even more immaculate than before. "Welcome back to Langley," he announced, his gaze briefly flickering over Jasmine before addressing the broader group. "You're in for a special treat today. Our tactical demonstration team will showcase maneuvers actually used in combat operations. These aren't airshow tricks. They're the tactical skills that keep our nation safe." As he led them toward the observation area, Jasmine noticed something different about the base today. There were significantly more female officers present than during their previous visit, including several black women in flight suits, walking purposefully between buildings. Taylor noticed too. "Where did all these women come from?" she whispered to Brandon. "They weren't here last time." Reynolds overheard. "Visiting personnel for the demonstration. Multiple units coordinate for these events." Mr. Wilson nodded appreciatively. "Wonderful to see such diversity in our armed forces." Reynolds's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed, the military has certainly evolved in recent years." As they passed a maintenance hangar, Jasmine spotted Sergeant Foster directing a ground crew preparing an aircraft. When Foster noticed Jasmine, she subtly winked before returning to her clipboard. They arrived at a cordoned viewing area where bleachers had been set up for spectators. Reynolds positioned himself at the front of the group, launching into an educational speech about the aircraft they would soon see. "What you're about to witness represents the pinnacle of American air superiority," he declared. "These pilots are the exceptional few who possess the physical and mental capabilities necessary for the most demanding missions. Less than 1% of applicants ultimately qualify for these elite positions." A distinguished older officer approached the bleachers, a full-bird colonel with numerous decorations adorning his uniform. "Ladies and gentlemen," the colonel announced, "I'm Colonel Marcus Thompson, base commander. It's my privilege to welcome you to this demonstration by our finest combat pilots recently returned from a successful deployment overseas." As the commander spoke, Jasmine's attention was drawn to the flight line, where ground crews were making final preparations on a formation of F-15E Strike Eagles. From this distance, she couldn't identify the pilots, but something caught her eye on the lead aircraft, a small purple ribbon dangling from the canopy rail. Her heart leapt. That purple ribbon was her mother's lucky charm, a piece of Jasmine's baby blanket that had accompanied Major Washington on every combat mission for 12 years. Jasmine stood involuntarily straining to see better. Captain Reynolds noticed her excitement and frowned. "Students must remain seated at all times," he announced, loudly placing a firm hand on Jasmine's shoulder to guide her back down. "Safety protocols are strictly enforced on the flight line." Then deliberately, he instructed the group to move to a different viewing section, one that offered a more distant perspective of the aircraft. "But we can see better from here," protested Mr. Wilson. "This area is reserved for military families," Reynolds replied smoothly. "The alternate viewing section provides a superior angle for educational purposes." As students began reluctantly relocating, Sergeant Foster appeared suddenly at Jasmine's side. "Technical Sergeant Foster," She introduced herself to Mrs. Patterson. "I've been asked to escort this student to the VIP section, Educational Outreach Program for Aspiring Aviators." Before anyone could object, Foster guided Jasmine away from the group, moving quickly through the crowd. "My mom's here, isn't she?" Jasmine whispered, barely containing her excitement. "Keep walking and don't look back," Foster murmured. "Reynolds is watching." They approached a roped-off area where senior officers and their families had prime viewing positions. The security officer checking credentials was the same black staff sergeant who had witnessed Jasmine's humiliation during the previous visit. He studied them as they approached, recognition flashing in his eyes. "Credentials?" he asked officially. Foster hesitated. "Staff Sergeant Williams, this is Major Washington's daughter," he finished, surprising them both. "I know exactly who she is." He lifted the rope. "The Major told me to expect you both." Reynolds, who had followed them, arrived just in time to witness this exchange. "Staff Sergeant," he barked, "these individuals are not authorized for VIP access. The student needs to rejoin her class immediately." Staff Sergeant Williams turned to Reynolds with a neutral expression that somehow conveyed volumes of contempt. "Sir, I have direct instructions from higher regarding this guest." He deliberately checked his tablet. "I don't see your name on the access list for this section either, Captain." Reynolds' face flushed.
I'm the liaison officer for the school group.
"Then perhaps you should liaise with your assigned group," Sir Williams suggested professionally. "They appear to be waiting for you." Before Reynolds could respond, the unmistakable roar of jet engines drew everyone's attention skyward. The first aircraft had begun taxiing toward the runway. The F-15E Strike Eagles thundered down the runway in perfect sequence, lifting majestically into the clear blue sky. 4 aircraft climbed in tight formation, afterburners glowing like miniature suns as they disappeared into the heavens. The crowd fell silent in collective awe before erupting into applause as the jets reappeared, screaming across the airfield at nearly 500 miles per hour in a low-level flyby that vibrated in Jasmine's chest. "Those are the best pilots in the world right there," a nearby Air Force general told his wide-eyed son. "Strike Eagles from the 391st, just back from classified operations overseas." Jasmine held her breath as the aircraft separated into a complex series of tactical maneuvers. The lead jet executed a flawless high-G climbing turn, followed by a tactical descent that seemed to defy physics. "That's the midnight reversal," she whispered to Sergeant Foster, recognizing her mother's signature move, a combat maneuver Major Washington had developed that had subsequently been adopted into tactical training. Captain Reynolds had positioned himself nearby, still clearly irritated at being excluded from the VIP section. "That's a standard combat turn with a modified tactical descent," he explained loudly to the students gathered around him. "Nothing special about it." Foster rolled her eyes. "Some people can't appreciate artistry when they see it," she muttered. The aerial demonstration continued for 20 breathtaking minutes, the pilots showcasing maneuvers actually used in combat rather than the flashier stunts of traditional air shows. Jasmine watched with practiced eye, identifying her mother's distinctive flying style in the lead aircraft's movements. "And now," announced Colonel Thompson over the PA system, "our demonstration team will perform a tactical landing sequence before meeting with our distinguished visitors." The 4 aircraft approached the runway in tight succession, touching down with precision before taxiing toward the viewing area. Ground crews rushed to position stairs beside each jet as the engines wound down. Reynolds, who had worked his way closer to Jasmine and Foster, spoke with forced casualness. "These are the nation's elite combat aviators. The tip of the spear. Not just anyone makes this cut." The audience held a collective breath as the canopies raised on each aircraft. Pilots began emerging, removing helmets as they descended the stairs to the tarmac. From the lead jet, a figure in a full flight suit climbed down, back turned to the crowd. When the pilot reached the ground, they removed their helmet, revealing a head of short black curls. As the pilot turned, Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. Major Alicia Washington stood tall and proud, her dark skin gleaming with a light sheen of perspiration from the cockpit's heat. The silver oak leaves of her rank caught the sunlight as she scanned the crowd, eventually locking eyes with her daughter. Jasmine noticed Captain Reynolds had gone completely pale beside her. "That's my mom," she said quietly, not to Reynolds but to herself, as if confirming what she had always known. Major Washington spotted Jasmine and raised her hand in a small wave, her professional demeanor briefly softening into a mother's warm smile. Reynolds, recovering from his shock, stepped forward to block Jasmine as she moved toward the tarmac. "Civilians aren't permitted on the flight line," he insisted, his voice strained. Staff Sergeant Williams materialized at Jasmine's side. "The Major has authorized her daughter's access, Captain. I'll escort her." Reynolds opened his mouth to protest, but Williams had already guided Jasmine past the barrier. Behind them, Jasmine could hear the astonished whispers from her classmates and teachers. "That's really her mom. Oh my God." Jasmine was telling the truth. Is that the first black female fighter pilot? The 50 yards separating Jasmine from her mother felt like the longest distance she had ever crossed. When she finally reached Major Washington, the professional soldier briefly gave way to the loving parent who had been absent for months. Washington knelt and embraced her daughter tightly. "I missed you so much, baby," she whispered into Jasmine's ear. "I knew you'd come," Jasmine replied, tears streaming freely now. "No one believed me, but I knew." Washington stood, keeping an arm around her daughter's shoulders as her fellow pilots gathered around them supportively. Jasmine noticed the diversity of the team. 2 men and 2 women of various ethnicities, all regarding her with warm smiles. "So, this is the famous," Jasmine said, "a Latina pilot with captain's bars. Your mom shows us your school pictures every chance she gets." Reynolds approached cautiously. His earlier confidence evaporated. "Major Washington," he acknowledged stiffly. "I wasn't aware you had returned to Langley." Washington studied him with cool recognition. "Captain Reynolds, it's been, 7 years? Not since your final evaluation with the Special Tactics Qualification course, I believe." The implication hung in the air. Reynolds had not simply been unaware of Washington's position, he had failed to qualify for the very special operations role she now commanded. Base Commander Thompson approached the growing assembly, extending his hand to Major Washington. "Outstanding demonstration, Major. Your team's tactical innovations are already being incorporated into the training syllabus." "Thank you, sir," Washington replied professionally, though her eyes never left Reynolds. "My daughter tells me she visited the base recently on a school tour. I understand there was some confusion about my service record." The commander raised an eyebrow. "Confusion? Major Washington is one of our most decorated combat pilots. Surely there wasn't any question about her credentials." Reynolds' face had turned an alarming shade of red. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding, sir. Security protocols regarding special operations personnel wouldn't have prevented you from acknowledging the existence of a fellow officer," Washington finished calmly, "especially when speaking to her daughter." An uncomfortable silence settled over the tarmac as the implications of Major Washington's words registered with everyone present. Students and teachers from Westridge Academy had gradually migrated closer, drawn by the unfolding drama, creating an impromptu audience for the confrontation. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Captain Reynolds suggested, his voice low and strained. "I think we're past that point," Major Washington replied evenly. She turned to Jasmine. "Sweetheart, would you mind telling me exactly what Captain Reynolds said when you mentioned my name during your school visit?" Jasmine glanced nervously between her mother and Reynolds. "He said he didn't know any Major Washington in special operations and that I was being disrespectful to real service members by making up stories." Washington's expression remained professional, but the temperature of her gaze dropped several degrees. "I see." The other 3 pilots from Washington's team had positioned themselves in a loose semicircle behind her, a subtle show of solidarity that wasn't lost on anyone present. Major, with all due respect. Reynolds began his tone. Defensive. Operational security protocols dictate that special access program personnel maintain. Save it, James Washington interrupted using his first name deliberately. OPSEC doesn't require lying to a child about her parents' existence. You knew exactly who I was. Reynolds' jaw tightened. We haven't crossed paths in years. Personnel assignments change. Yet, you recognized my daughter immediately, Washington countered. And rather than simply saying you weren't authorized to discuss my assignment, you chose to humiliate her in front of her classmates and teachers. Base Commander Thompson looked increasingly troubled. Captain Reynolds, is this accurate? Before Reynolds could respond, Sergeant Foster stepped forward. Sir, I witnessed Captain Reynolds telling the student her mother didn't exist in any special operations capacity. He specifically said he knew every pilot in those units and she was making it all up. Reynolds' face flushed deeper. Sergeant Foster is exaggerating. I simply explained that certain information isn't available to civilians. By telling my daughter I don't exist, Washington's voice remained controlled, but her eyes flashed dangerously. The base commander's expression hardened. Captain, we'll discuss this further in my office. For now, I believe you owe Major Washington and her daughter an apology. Reynolds stood rigidly military-bearing, taking over as he realized the severity of his situation. Major Washington, Miss Baker, I apologize if my adherence to security protocols was overzealous. It was not my intention to cause distress. The apology rang hollow, and Washington clearly wasn't satisfied, but she maintained her professionalism. Captain Reynolds and I have history, Commander, she explained, turning to Thompson. He washed out of the Special Tactics Qualification Program under my instructions 7 years ago. One of the evaluation notes I submitted cited his difficulty accepting authority from female officers. Reynolds flinched visibly. That's no excuse for unprofessional behavior toward a child, Thompson replied firmly. From the gathering of Westridge faculty, Principal Hargrove and Mr. Wilson stepped forward, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and damage control. Major Washington Hargrove began extending his hand. I'm Principal Hargrove from Westridge Academy. There appears to have been a terrible misunderstanding regarding your daughter. Washington ignored the outstretched hand. A misunderstanding implies an honest mistake, Principal Hargrove. My daughter tells me she's been called a liar by teachers, threatened with the loss of her scholarship and subjected to bullying while under your care, all for telling the truth about her mother's profession. Mrs. Patterson spoke up, her voice high with nervousness. Major, surely you understand our position. Without verification, Jasmine's claims seemed rather extraordinary. And did you seek verification? Washington asked sharply. Or did you simply decide my daughter was lying because it seemed implausible that a black woman could hold such a position? The uncomfortable silence that followed was answer enough. Principal Hargrove cleared his throat. Major Washington I, assure you we value diversity at Westridge Academy. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss this situation more privately. Count on it, Washington replied. My daughter's educational environment is definitely something we need to discuss. As the awkward exchange continued, Jasmine noticed that Reynolds had maneuvered slightly away from the group. The captain was now speaking quietly but intensely with Principal Hargrove's assistant, their heads bent together conspiratorially. The base commander, noticing the same thing, frowned. Captain Reynolds, you're dismissed. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. As Reynolds departed with a stiff salute, Washington turned her full attention to the Westridge contingent. I'd like to speak with Jasmine's teachers and administrators. Now. Commander Thompson offered his office, and soon Washington was seated across from Principal Hargrove, Mr. Wilson, and Mrs. Patterson. Jasmine sat beside her mother, occasionally glancing at the adults' tense faces. Let me be clear, Washington began. My daughter has been truthful about my career from day one. The fact that you found it easier to believe she was mentally unstable than to consider she might be telling the truth speaks volumes about the environment at your institution. Major, with all due respect, Hargrove countered we had no way to verify her claims. Captain Reynolds, a decorated officer, explicitly contradicted her story. And that didn't strike you as unusual, that a military officer would go out of his way to discredit a 12-year-old girl. Mr. Wilson shifted uncomfortably. We had no reason to doubt Captain Reynolds. He and Principal Hargrove attended college together. His character has always been beyond reproach. Washington's eyebrows rose. Is that so? She pulled out her phone and made a brief call. Sergeant Williams, could you bring the personnel file I requested? Thank you. Minutes later, Staff Sergeant Williams arrived with a folder which he handed to Washington before departing. Did you know Washington asked conversationally that Captain Reynolds was denied promotion twice due to conduct issues, or that he received formal counseling for creating a hostile work environment for female subordinates? Principal Hargrove paled. James never mentioned. Of course he didn't, Washington interrupted. Just like he never mentioned that I was his qualifying officer when he failed special tactics selection. His ego couldn't handle it. The principal removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Major Washington, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Your friend used his position to deliberately discredit my daughter because of his personal grudge against me. And rather than considering the possibility that Jasmine was telling the truth, you and your staff jumped to the conclusion that she was either lying or delusional. We had concerns about her academic performance as well, Mrs. Patterson interjected. Her recent history essay contained numerous unsubstantiated claims about military integration. Washington fixed her with a sharp gaze, such as, she wrote that black female pilots have served in combat roles since 2013, which simply isn't accurate. I flew my first combat mission in November 2013. Mrs. Patterson, perhaps your information is outdated. As the meeting continued, Washington methodically dismantled each justification the educators offered. Eventually, Jasmine's grandfather arrived, having been contacted by the base's visitor center. Master Sergeant Baker, retired, entered the room with the dignified bearing of someone who had spent decades in uniform. He nodded respectfully to Commander Thompson before turning his attention to the Westridge administrators. I understand you've been questioning my granddaughter's honesty and mental stability, he said without preamble. Master Sergeant Baker, Principal Hargrove, began. We've had a serious misunderstanding. No, the older man interrupted firmly. What you've had is a serious failure of judgment. I've been documenting every instance of mistreatment since this began. He placed a notebook on the table. Every comment, every incident, every name of every person involved. I may be retired, but I still know how the system works. Washington smiled slightly at her father's meticulous approach. Are you threatening litigation? Hargrove asked, alarm evident in his voice. I'm informing you that we have options, Baker replied calmly. Whether we pursue them depends on what happens next. 3 days after the dramatic confrontation at Langley Air Force Base, Major Alicia Washington sat in Westridge Academy's conference room. Her service dress uniform immaculate, a folder of documents placed precisely before her. Across the table sat Principal Hargrove, looking significantly less comfortable in his tailored suit. Beside him sat a nervous woman in her 50s who had introduced herself as Diane Mercer, Westridge School Board representative. Jasmine and her grandfather occupied chairs along the wall, silent observers to the proceedings. I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting, Washington began professionally. I believe we have several matters to resolve regarding my daughter's educational experience. Principal Hargrove nodded stiffly. Of course, Major. Again, let me express our sincere regret for the misunderstanding. Let's be precise with our language. Principal Hargrove Washington corrected. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a systemic failure to provide my daughter with a supportive educational environment compounded by what appears to be institutional bias. The school board representative leaned forward.
Major Washington, that's a very serious allegation.
Yes, it is, Washington agreed. Which is why I've documented everything thoroughly. She opened her folder, revealing neatly organized papers. My father has kept detailed records of every incident Jasmine reported. Additionally, I've obtained statements from Sergeant Foster and Staff Sergeant Williams regarding Captain Reynolds' behavior during the field trips. She extracted another document. Most concerning, however, is what my colleagues in military intelligence discovered when I asked them to look into the relationship between Captain Reynolds and Westridge Academy. Hargrove's face drained of color. Not only were you college roommates, as Mr. Wilson mentioned, Washington continued, but Reynolds' father sits on your board of trustees. Furthermore, Reynolds has been a guest speaker at Westridge 8 times in the past 3 years, far more frequently than any other military representative. The school board representative turned to Hargrove with obvious surprise. Is this accurate, Edward? Before he could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mr. Wilson entered, followed by Mrs. Patterson and the school counselor, Mrs. Winters. You requested our presence, Wilson asked nervously. Yes, Washington confirmed. Please be seated. We were just discussing the connection between Captain Reynolds and Westridge Academy. As the teachers settled into their chairs, Washington continued. My investigation also revealed something else troubling. Reynolds isn't the only connection to Westridge with a history of discriminatory behavior. She slid a document across the table to the school board representative. This is a statistical analysis of disciplinary actions at Westridge over the past 5 years, broken down by race and gender. Minority students, particularly black females, receive disproportionately severe consequences for equivalent infractions. Mrs. Mercer scanned the document, her expression growing increasingly troubled. Where did you obtain this data? Public records request, Washington replied. The scholarship program Jasmine participates in is partially funded by state educational grants, which requires Westridge to report certain metrics. My father compiled and analyzed the raw data. Master Sergeant Baker nodded from his seat. 27 years in military intelligence teaches you a few things about pattern recognition. Principal Hargrove loosened his tie slightly. Major Washington, what exactly are you seeking here? Accountability, she answered simply, starting with an explanation of why my daughter was threatened with losing her scholarship for telling the truth, while other students faced no consequences for bullying her. The principal glanced at his colleagues before responding carefully. There appears to have been a serious lapse in judgment on our part. Captain Reynolds' assurances carried significant weight, and we failed to investigate properly. And the connection between you and Reynolds had nothing to do with your willingness to take his word over my daughter's. Hargrove's silence was damning. Mrs. Mercer closed the folder and addressed Washington directly. Major, on behalf of the Westridge School Board, I want to extend our deepest apologies to you and Jasmine. This situation reveals several serious issues that require immediate attention. She turned to Hargrove. Principal Hargrove, I'll need to speak with the full board about this matter immediately. Am I being fired? Hargrove asked quietly. At minimum, you and Mr. Wilson will be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, Mrs. Mercer replied firmly. Your personal connection to Captain Reynolds represents a clear conflict of interest that should have been disclosed. Mr. Wilson protested. But I was just following Edward's lead. I had no idea. You publicly humiliated a 12-year-old child and threatened to call her grandfather about her disruptive behavior for simply telling the truth, Washington interrupted. Your position as an educator comes with responsibilities, regardless of who's giving the orders. The room fell silent until Mrs. Patterson unexpectedly spoke up. I need to say something, she began hesitantly. When Jasmine first mentioned her mother was a Special Forces pilot, I didn't believe her. Not because of Captain Reynolds, but because it didn't fit my preconception of who could hold such a position. She turned to Jasmine directly. I never consciously thought I was biased against you because of your race, but looking back at my behavior, I was. I'm deeply sorry, Jasmine. The admission hung in the air for a moment before Washington nodded slightly, acknowledging the teacher's honesty. Mrs. Mercer made several notes before addressing the group again. Here's what happens next. Principal Hargrove and Mr. Wilson are placed on immediate administrative leave. Mrs. Patterson, your honesty is appreciated, but you'll be required to complete additional training on unconscious bias and culturally responsive teaching. She turned to Washington. Major, what specific remedies would you like to see implemented for Jasmine? First, her academic record needs to be reviewed and amended where bias affected her grades. Second, the students who participated in bullying her need appropriate consequences and education. Third, I want Westridge to implement a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program, not just empty gestures, but meaningful changes to the school culture. And if these conditions aren't met, Mrs. Mercer asked. Washington's expression remained professional. Then I take this to the media, the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division, and our attorneys. As the meeting concluded, Jasmine felt a mixture of vindication and exhaustion. The adults filed out, leaving her momentarily alone with her mother and grandfather. "Was that okay, Mom?" she asked quietly. "I don't want everyone to lose their jobs because of me." Washington knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. "This isn't because of you, Jasmine. It's because of their actions. Accountability isn't punishment, it's how systems improve." Outside the conference room, they found a local news crew setting up in the hallway, alerted by someone about the decorated combat pilot visiting the prestigious academy. Major Washington called a reporter. "We understand you've had quite an impact on Westridge Academy. Care to comment on the rumors about a new aviation program for underrepresented students?" Washington looked momentarily surprised, then smiled. "Actually, that's an excellent idea. 6 months transformed Westridge Academy almost beyond recognition. On a bright spring morning, students gathered in the newly renovated auditorium for a special assembly. The room buzzed with anticipation as Major Alicia Washington took the stage, now a familiar and respected figure at the school. "Good morning, Westridge," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the packed room. "When I first visited this campus last fall, I came as a concerned parent. Today, I return as both a parent and a partner in your educational journey." In the front row, Jasmine sat tall, a confidence in her posture that had been absent months earlier. Beside her sat her grandfather, beaming with pride, and Sergeant Foster, who had become a regular visitor to the campus. Washington gestured to the screens behind her, which displayed schematics of aircraft alongside mathematical equations. Aviation isn't just about flying, it's about physics, engineering, leadership, and courage. These principles apply whether you're in a cockpit or a classroom. The transformation of Westridge hadn't come easily. After the investigation confirmed systematic discrimination against minority scholarship students, the school board had taken decisive action. Principal Hargrove resigned rather than face termination, while Mr. Wilson was reassigned to administrative duties without student contact. In their place stood Dr. Kimberly Jefferson, the new principal, a black woman with a PhD in education leadership and 20 years of experience in diverse educational settings. Major Washington's guest lecture series has become the highlight of our STEM curriculum, Dr. Jefferson announced to applause. And today, I'm thrilled to announce that the Washington Aviation Initiative has secured funding for the next 5 years, ensuring opportunities for underrepresented students across our district. What had begun as Major Washington's suggestion during a news interview had blossomed into a comprehensive program offering specialized training in aviation sciences to students from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in the M&E, a field. As the assembly concluded, Jasmine was approached by Taylor and Brandon, once her most persistent tormentors, now subdued and respectful. Jasmine Taylor began awkwardly, "My parents want to know if there are still openings in the summer aviation program. They said, I need to expand my perspectives." Brandon nodded. "My dad said the same thing. After what happened," he said, "I need to learn about real heroes, not just the ones who look like me." Their parents' sudden interest in their children's moral education had come after Major Washington's story made local news, exposing the culture of privilege and bias that had flourished under the previous administration. "Applications are still open," Jasmine replied evenly. "But the program requires a genuine interest in aviation, not just parental pressure." In the months since the confrontation at Langley, Jasmine had discovered a new role for herself, not just as the girl whose mother is a pilot, but as a leader in her own right. She now headed Westridge's newly formed aviation club, which regularly attracted 30 students to its meetings. After school, Jasmine and her mother walked to the parking lot where Sergeant Foster waited. The mechanic had begun volunteering twice weekly to teach mechanical engineering concepts to Westridge students. "Ready for the big day tomorrow?" Foster asked. Jasmine nodded excitedly. "I can't believe we're actually going to speak to Congress." The invitation to testify before a congressional committee on military inclusion had arrived a month earlier. Major Washington and Jasmine would share their experience as part of a broader examination of diversity challenges in elite military programs. "Just remember," Washington advised, "speak your truth clearly and directly. Your experience matters." That evening, they drove to Langley Air Force Base for a special occasion. With special permission, Jasmine would sit in the cockpit of an actual F-15E, not a simulator or training mock-up, but the aircraft her mother had flown in combat. As they approached the hangar, Jasmine spotted her grandfather waiting in his pressed Air Force uniform, the medals of his own distinguished service gleaming under the lights. "There's my two favorite pilots," he called, embracing them both. Inside the hangar, the massive Strike Eagle waited, its sleek form embodying both beauty and lethal capability. With her mother's assistance, Jasmine climbed into the cockpit, settling into the seat where Washington had flown countless missions. "It feels different than the simulator," Jasmine observed, running her hands reverently over the controls. "That's because it's real," her mother replied, standing on the maintenance ladder beside her. "Just like you are, just like your dreams are." As Jasmine familiarized herself with the cockpit, Washington shared previously classified details about her recent deployment, how she had led a precision strike that disabled enemy communications, allowing for the extraction of surrounded Allied forces without casualties. "Why did Captain Reynolds hate you so much?" Jasmine asked suddenly. Washington considered the question. "Some people can't accept that their limitations aren't universal. When he failed the qualification course, I was instructing he couldn't reconcile that with his view of himself or of me." "Where is he now?" "Transferred to an administrative position in Alaska," Washington answered with a small smile. "Very far from impressionable students." From below, her grandfather watched them with evident pride, occasionally answering questions from passing maintenance crew about his own service. Later that evening, as they drove home, they passed a newsstand displaying the school newspaper. The headline read, "Jasmine Baker receives Air Force Academy nomination, youngest in school history." Though still years away from actual attendance, the nomination represented both recognition of Jasmine's potential and an important symbolic victory. The path that had once seemed impossibly steep now stretched before her, challenging but navigable. "Mom," Jasmine asked as they pulled into their driveway, "do you think things will actually change for good? I mean..." Washington considered her daughter's question carefully. "Systems don't transform overnight, Jasmine. But when enough brave people stand up for truth, the momentum becomes unstoppable." She squeezed her daughter's hand. "And you, my girl, started something bigger than you know." As they entered their home, the framed photo that had once stood alone on Jasmine's desk Major Washington, beside her aircraft, had been joined by a new image: mother and daughter in matching flight suits, standing tall together beneath the wings of an F-15E Strike Eagle, their faces reflecting not just their shared features, but their shared determination to soar above limitations. Jasmine's story teaches us that truth perseveres even when faced with systemic bias and prejudice. When institutions and authority figures discount someone's reality based on race or gender, they reveal their own limitations, not the truth-tellers. The story demonstrates how discrimination often operates through subtle disbelief rather than overt hostility, questioning credibility rather than making explicit racist statements. We see how powerful allies can make all the difference when fighting injustice. Sergeant Foster, Staff Sergeant Williams, and Jasmine's grandfather provided crucial support that helped Jasmine maintain her dignity and eventually triumph. Their willingness to risk their own positions speaks to true allyship. Most importantly, the story reveals that transforming broken systems requires both courage and accountability. Major Washington didn't simply prove her existence. She demanded institutional change to protect future students from similar discrimination. True justice isn't about individual vindication, but creating lasting change that benefits everyone. What would you have done in Jasmine's situation? Would you have fought back against the disbelief, or would you have stayed silent? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story about overcoming racism inspired you to stand up for truth in your own life, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and perseverance. Have you ever been underestimated because of your race or gender? We'd love to hear how you overcame those challenges. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the sky truly has no limits when you believe in yourself and stand in your truth.